In a show like Doctor Who, of both space and time travel, most stories fall into two categories: science fiction and historicals. We've already gotten our fix of sci-fi with the Daleks, and while you could say that our first historical was an unearthly child, we have yet to see the Doctor and co meet and interact with an actual historical figure, to see how our travellers find their way through a well-documented slice of history. Wouldn't that be fun? Too bad it'll never happen. Huh. Well, what do you know? So, as I mentioned in my last video, several stories were in production before the crew knew if the show was going to be recommissioned or not. Go watch my previous video for more context on that, please. One of these stories was a little number called Marco Polo, and it was originally going to be the third story in the series, but was pushed back to fourth place. Series creator Sidney Newman suggested one of his old colleagues, John Lucarotti, for the task of writing the story, as he had already had previous experience on writing Marco Polo. This story marks the first time that the Doctor and his companions have interacted with a famous historical figure, a trend that will continue throughout Hartnett's era. When it came to casting for this serial, the role of Marco Polo was given to actor Mark Eden, and the role of director was given to Waris Hussein, who directed the first story, An Unearthly Child. A lot of work went on in designing of this story, as designer Barry Newman had to research 13th century Asian architecture for references when designing the sets. Many other people, such as Daphne Dare, the costume designer, and Tristan Carey with the musical score, brought their talents to the story and helped to create the atmosphere of ancient China. And that's why it's such a shame that all these people's hard work have been lost to time. You see, Marco Polo was the first and prime example of a problem many early Doctor Who stories face, and that's the fact that they no longer exist. It is the first missing story we've encountered in Doctor Who so far. You see, back in the earlier days of television, reruns of old episodes were a very uncommon thing, and most shows were only ever aired once. Because of this, many recordings of these shows were junked and completely erased from the BBC's archives. This includes Doctor Who, as after original broadcast, the tapes will only remain in the storage for a few years before being junked, and that's why there's a large handful of stories that no longer exist. But I hear you asking, if these stories no longer exist, then why am I making a video on it? Well, dear viewer, why don't you shut up and let me explain? Now, while visual recordings of these episodes are missing, the audio from them are still intact, and with that, there are many telesnap photos taken during the original recording. And with these few surviving bits, the Doctor Who fandom has created reconstructions. These reconstructions work by taking the surviving audio and using the pictures taken from the recordings and stitching them together to create a Frankenstein version of the original episodes. The main team behind these reconstructions are Loose Cannon, an independent video production company that has created reconstructions of the missing episodes of Doctor Who and posted them on their Dailymotion account if you'd like to see for yourself. Their reconstruction of Marco Polo is the one that I'll be using today, and I feel that that's pretty much all the explanation needed. So, with all that said, let's finally dive into Marco Polo. Part 1, titled The Roof of the World, opens with Barbara and Susan finding a giant footprint in the snow. Ian tries to rationalize it. As they stare out across the snowy mountain peaks, Ian and Barbara wonder if they've landed back on Earth.
In the Alps?
Could be the Andes. Himalayas. Roof of the world.
Just then, the Doctor comes out of the TARDIS in a right huff.
We're always in trouble. Isn't it extraordinary? It follows us.
It seems the ship is broken once again. All the lights have shut off and they haven't got any water. Ian tells them they don't have to worry about water because of all the snow, and that he and Barbara will descend down the mountain to find some fuel. Which brings up the question of, does the TARDIS run on petrol? Well, to be honest, a machine that big probably runs on diesel, if anything. Do you think the Doctor complains about gas prices? I tell you, my dear boy, these gas prices are most outrageous. While searching for fuel, Barbara stops to catch her breath when she sees something that frightens her. Ian comes to comfort her, and they head back to the TARDIS, where the Doctor is complaining about the faults in the TARDIS. Barbara mentions he saw something down the mountain, and the Doctor and Ian figure it's a person. Just then, the figure appears again, and the four decide to chase after them. As they turn a corner, however, they run into a whole gang of Mongols. Their leader accuses them of being evil spirits, and is about to have them killed, when...
Put up your swords!
This stranger commands them to stop in the name of Kublai Khan and takes our group back to his camp. At the camp, our four travellers make themselves comfortable as a young servant girl makes soup for them. Barbara and Susan discuss why a European man would be working for Kublai Khan. They correctly identify him as Marco Polo, the famous Italian merchant. He says that the servant girl's name is Ping Cho, and the man from earlier who tried to have them killed is Tagana. They're travelling to Shank 2 in Cathay, which is what they used to call China back then, to meet up with the mighty Khan. They ask what year it is, and Marco confusingly tells them that it's 1289. As night falls, everyone goes to their own tents, and Susan and Ping Cho talk about their homes. Ping Cho says from where she's from, her father is an important government official, and that she's on her way to Shangtu to get married. Susan is surprised to hear this, as Ping Cho is only 16, like herself. Ping Cho says that she's been arranged to marry this man because he is very important, and that he is also...
And he's 75 years old.
Police! Police! Help! Police!
As they travel by map, Marco's narration reveals his hidden plans.
I wonder what the stranger's reaction will be when I tell them what I propose to do.
They arrive in the town of Lop, where the TARDIS has been placed in the courtyard, but when the Doctor goes to start his repairs...
What does this mean?
Please sit down, Doctor.
I don't wish to sit down. I want you to call your gun.
It seems Marco has other plans. Marco starts talking about his life and how as a young man he travelled from Venice to the east with his father and uncle and fell into the employment of Kublai Khan. That was 12 years ago, and since then he has only asked the Khan to return to his home of Italy once and was refused. He plans to ask the Khan again, but this time he will present him with a gift so fantastic that he'll have to say yes. Though our group says that they need the TARDIS to get back home, Marco says that they can just build another one, and if not, he'll take them back home personally. Barbara tries to assure Marco that he will return to Venice one day, because she's a history teacher, but he won't listen and storms off. The Doctor starts laughing uncontrollably.
He's serious.
I know he is, yes.
What you going to do?
Oh, I haven't the faintest idea.
Round the back, Takano is talking to one of his thugs. They plan to poison everyone's water and steal the TARDIS for themselves.
And on the third night, I will walk back to you. Then we're going to ride back here to Lop. Wait for 2 days. And then return to the caravan to collect the thing of magic that will bring the mighty Kublai Khan to his knees.
In part 2, titled The Singing Sands, our travellers are crossing the Gobi Desert, with the TARDIS now in Polo's control. Later, as they prepare for dinner, we see the Doctor is now refusing to eat with the others. Susan goes to give him some food, but she soon comes back after he refuses and is visibly upset. Outside the tent, Barbara tries to comfort her. Susan complains about how her grandfather is being immature about the situation, but Barbara says he's just upset that his property was stolen by him, by a man that he sees as far inferior to him. Susan longs to be back travelling again.
One day, you'll know all the mysteries of the skies. And we'll stop our wandering.
Then you and I will say goodbye.
Oh, not yet. Not for long.
Susan goes off to her bed, where her and Ping Cho plan to stay up to see the moon rise. Later, as they step out to see the moon, they see Takana sneaking away, and for some reason they decide to follow him. They soon regret their decision as a sandstorm breaks out, and it's very loud. Back at the camp, Barbara goes to check on the girls, only to find them missing. She wants to go out and find them, but Ian and Marco stop her from running out into the storm. Time passes as they wait for the storm to die down, and they wonder what they should do. Apparently the doctor has been able to sleep through all that noise.
Doctor's still asleep.
You don't want him to know about the girls.
Don't ask me how. Just then the girls walk back into the tent, followed by Tigana. He says that he found them hiding behind a rock and he brought them back. Marcus starts making preparations to leave, whilst Tigana sneaks around the back with his poison. Back in bed, Susan suspects Tigana. Outside, Tigana sneaks to the wagon carrying the water supply, where he cuts holes in the bags and pours them out into the sand. The next morning, the others find that they have little water left. Marco is under the impression that it was the work of bandits. They argue whether or not to turn back or to struggle forward to an oasis. They decide to go with the latter, and as day by brutal day passes, they travel further into the scorching desert with their water supply lessening. They stop to ration out some of the water, and they see how little they have left. And of course the doctor has something to say.
Marco, is this all we're going to get until tonight?
Oh, stop complaining, you old fuck. Everyone's suffering. Though, then again, you wouldn't be in this situation if it wasn't for Marco taking your TARDIS, so maybe you do have something to complain about. Tigana offers to travel on ahead to bring back water for the others, and while he's gone, the doc collapses of exhaustion. Susan, Barbara and Ian beg Marco to let him stay in the TARDIS, and Marco obliges. We then cut to Tigana at the oasis, where he helps himself to some water.
Here's water, Marco Polo! Come for it!
In part 3, titled The Cave of 500 Eyes, the rest of the caravan is forced to travel through the night without water when Tigana doesn't return. In the TARDIS, the Doctor and Susan sleep when they are awoken by water drops. Due to the heat of the sun on the TARDIS, and now that it's night, water has condensed on the walls of the TARDIS, and the Doctor and Susan quickly go to collect some. When they bring the water out for the others, Marco is pissed because the Doctor had told them previously that he didn't have any water. Ian has to give Marco a science lesson.
Last night it was cold. Bitterly cold, Marco. The outside of the caravan cold, but the inside stayed warm, and so moisture formed on the inside. It's condensation. We just call it.
Once Marco has calmed down, they share the water around, and it sustains them enough till they reach the oasis. There, they meet up with Tigana, who tells them a story about bandits at the oasis and how he's had to hide there all night. Marco once again eats this up. As they set up a camp, the Doctor tells the others that it will only take him a week to repair the TARDIS. Barbara is suspicious to Tigana lying and questions him. Marco takes it aside and then tells the Doctor to give him back the keys.
Doctor,
Well,
Barbara may have told you that we're leaving here tomorrow, so get all the rest you can today. You may use your caravan again, but before we leave in the morning, it will be locked and the key handed over to me.
young man, you have no concept of what is happening, have you? And you still don't seem to realize that you're speaking to a man of superior intellect.
Seriously, Doctor, you got to stop spending so much time on Reddit. They then travel out of the desert into the city of Tung Hong. As they rest at an inn, Marco talks of a local legend.
Have you heard of the Cave of 500 Eyes?
No, I haven't. I do not know that one either, Mr. Marco. I'm intrigued by this cave, Marco. Why is it called 500 Eyes?
On the walls are painted the faces of 250 evil men who once lived there.
Privately, the Doctor tells Ian that he's actually got the key to the TARDIS, and that the one he gave Polo was a fake he made. They then all sit down and watch Ping Cho put on a show, which I'm just gonna skip over. After the show, Tigana sneaks away, and seeing him leave, Barbara follows him. Tigana has entered the Cave of 500 Eyes and meets up with two associates of his, Malik and Akomat. In a hidden chamber in the cave, they come up with a plan to ambush Marco's caravan and steal the TARDIS.
And, Polo, and those that go with him, what of them? Kill them? Of course.
Just then, they notice Barbara and promptly capture her. Back at the inn, the others notice that she's missing and split up to go look for her. While Marco's gone, the Doctor tries to sneak into the TARDIS when he's stopped by Susan and Ping Cho. They have a hunch that Barbara went to the cave and they see Cheng Chu spying on them. They question him on where the cave is, and he reluctantly tells them. In the cave, the three search for Barbara. Back at the inn, Chin Chu tells Tagana what happened. He's not happy.
What cave?
He forced me, my lord. He forced me.
What cave?
The cave of 500 eyes.
Oh!
The doctor becomes fed up of searching the cave and decides to leave when they find a handkerchief belonging to Barbara. Then Susan screams. In part 4, The Wall of Lies, Ian and Marco found out where the others have got to and go after them. Back in the cave, we see what Susan was screaming about. The eyes on the walls were moving. Just then, Tagana shows up, telling them to leave because they are evil spirits. The doctor isn't worried, however.
I'm not afraid of ghosts.
Ian and Marco show up, and they look to see those moving eyes Susan was talking about. They find out that there's a secret passage, and they get it open. They see a man in there with Barbara tied up. Marco kills the kidnapper, and they save her. Back at the inn, Marco and Tagana share a private conversation. Tagana mentions how he saw the doctor sneaking away to his ship. Barbara comes in, and when asked why she went to the cave,
I followed Tagana there.
Me?
she says she was following Tagana. Tagana obviously denies these claims and leaves. Marco says Ping Cho can no longer share a bed with Susan as she is a bad influence. They travel aside the Great Wall, and at their next camp, the doctor says the TARDIS is almost fixed, and they should get ready to leave tomorrow. They're all glad to leave except Susan, who'll miss Ping Cho.
It's a pity they've been kept apart so much.
It's a pity there was any association at all. The Chinese child makes me nervous.
Come on, Doctor, you can't say stuff like that. The doctor is worried that Ping Cho saw him with the key and is going to tell Polo. In their tent, Susan and Ping Cho are suspicious of Tagana. They are trying to think of evidence to prove how he was in the Cave of 500 Eyes. Outside their tent, Tagana is listening in and hears them talk about the doctor's key. They arrive in the city of Shinju, and here, I like how Tagana makes a point to ask Marco permission to go to town.
I want to go into town.
Very well.
Thank you.
It makes him seem better than the others who have disobeyed Marco, and makes him seem more trustworthy compared to them. Ping Cho and Susan present Marco with their evidence of Tagana's treachery.
This is your proof. You call this evidence?
Yes, Mr. Marco.
And on these grounds you dare to call the warlord Tagana a liar? You foolish child, how dare you make such a reckless accusation?
Marco isn't impressed. In town, Tagana meets up with Akamat to plan the ambush later on. That night, our four prepare to leave. They sneak off to the TARDIS while Barbara keeps lookout. Then, Tagana enters the courtyard and, knowing that the doctor is in there, waits outside the TARDIS. Barbara goes to get Ian, who then tries to distract Marco while Susan and Barbara sneak off into the ship. Just then, Tagana snitches on
The old magician is in his caravan.
He's what?
They wait for the doctor to come out, and when he does, they force the key off of him. Then he and Polo have an explosive argument.
You poor, pathetic, stupid savage. Take them away!
This show of resentment leads to them being arrested, and as they travel to a bamboo forest, they are confined to a tent. They think of a plan to escape, and figure the only way is to capture Marco. The doctor says something that kinda sounds like he's gonna torture Marco.
Grandfather, supposing Mr. Marco won't give him the keys.
Don't worry, my child. I think by the time I've finished with that gentleman, he'll only be too glad to let us go.
Ian uses a piece of broken plate to cut his way out of the tent, and he goes to sneak up on the guard, but when he reaches him, he finds that he's not going to be all that much trouble. Episode 5, The Riders from Chengdu, sees that Tagana's bandits are waiting outside the camp to attack. Ian goes to wake up Marco, and they find Tagana trying to light a fire signal for his bandits. Mark gives a sword to Ian and the doctor as they prepare for battle. That's when Ian has an idea.
Wait a minute. Perhaps we can outwit them. Huh? We'll use this bamboo.
Well, what good would that do?
If we throw it on the fire, it'll expand and blow up. It's a terrifying noise.
As they get bamboo to pile up, Tagana tries to slip away, but the bandits arrive and the fight begins. In the heat of the battle, Tagana stabs Akamat. Then the bamboo fire goes off, and the bandits start to book it. After that, they travel out of the forest and set up camp again. As a thank you for warning him about the ambush, Marco says are no longer under arrest. They're all very suspicious of Tagana, and Barbara recognizes Akamat from the Cave of 500 Eyes. A courier from Kublai Khan arrives with a note from Marco. When Ping Cho goes to tell Polo, she sees him hiding the key. He makes her promise her not to tell the others. When he gets the letter, it says that he's needed urgently by the Khan and to leave for Shangtu. They decide to travel on ahead, while the TARDIS is following behind on a different caravan. They arrive in Chung Ting, where once the TARDIS has arrived, it's placed in a stable. At a fountain, Susan and Ping Cho watch the koi fish as they reminisce about their homes.
How I miss my home in Samarkand. And your home, Susan. You've never told me about that. It's so very far away. And if Messer Marco does give your caravan to Kublai Khan, you will never see your home again. That's right.
She says that she can't tell Susan where the key is, and Susan understands. Round the back, Tagana meets up with a man with an eye patch, and he tells him that he wants the TARDIS moved, so that it seems that it was stolen. At night, Ping Cho tells Marco it's time for dinner, and when he leaves, she steals the key. She then goes to Susan and says goodbye.
You will say goodbye, won't you? Of course I will. Ping Cho. What can I say?
Now with the key, they plan to escape. Ian pretends to be drunk next to this guard. He then knocks him out, and then they rush to the TARDIS. Susan goes back to say one final goodbye to Ping Cho, while the others wait in the TARDIS. Soon, she rushes toward the ship, but... Episode 6, Mighty Kublai Khan, has Tagana holding Susan hostage and forces the others to exit the TARDIS. Marco comes and sees what's going on. He makes the doctor give him back the key. Tagana tries to kill them, but is stopped by Marco. He questions them where they got the key, and Ian covers for Ping Cho. They travel to an inn, where Ian tries to get Marco to give them the key. He decides to finally tell him the truth.
I come from another time. Our caravan, it not only covers distance, it can cross time.
Travel into the past and the future?
Yes. Oh, I know it's difficult to believe, but it's the truth.
Though he wants to, Marco cannot believe him. He susses out that Ping Cho was the one who stole the key from them. That night, Ping Cho runs away. In the morning, they find Ping Cho is missing, and Ian offers to go after her. We see that she found her way back to Cheng Tung. At the same time, the eye patch man has come to collect the TARDIS. He's approached by Ping Cho, who asks if his caravan is travelling towards her home. He says yes, and takes her money as payment. Get sent. As she waits for him to come back, she is recognized by the innkeeper from earlier, who starts giving her a hard time, as that man obviously just stole her money. Ian arrives to take her home. They figure out that the man who rinsed her also hijacked the TARDIS. We then cut to the others, who are still travelling to Shangtung and stop at an inn. Marco and Tagana argue over Ian's intention to going after Ping Cho, as Tagana says it was just a ruse to get the TARDIS back. Marco isn't 100% on the idea, so Tagana brings up the subject of Ping Cho's arranged marriage to the Mega Nuns, to which Barbara and Susan are very against. Marco, who is a servant of the Khan who has blessed this marriage, is very unhappy, and so lets Tagana go after Ian. Ian and Ping Cho start to search for the TARDIS and find the path that the eye patch man took. We cut back to the others, who have finally made it to Shangtu and are awaiting the mighty Kublai Khan to greet them. Well, everyone but the doctor, who's having a hard time bowing because of his broken back. And that's when the great Khan arrives. And it turns out he's just as big as a geezer as the doctor. The Khan asks where Tagana is, and Marco says that he's not here, but he'll be back soon. The Khan says that their meeting needs to happen urgently, as the armies of Logai are closing in ever closer to Shangtu. Then the doctor and the Khan do old man stuff. We cut back to Ian and Ping Cho, who have tracked down the man who stole the TARDIS. The man admits to having been hired by Tagana to do it, and what do you know? Speak of the devil, he's...
Come.
In part 7, Assassin of Peking, Tagana is about to kill the two, but just then the courier from earlier comes to deliver a note. The eye patch man gets killed, and when asked about what's going on, both Tagana and Ian and Ping Cho blame the other for trying to steal the TARDIS. Not knowing who to believe, the courier takes them all back to Peking. At Peking, the Khan and the others have arrived. The Doctor and him are playing a game of backgammon, and the Doctor is absolutely cleaning him. He then gets an idea.
If I win, my TARDIS comes back to me.
Though reluctant, the Khan agrees. Marco comes to tell the Khan that Tagana has arrived in the city. When Marco hears that his gift and ticket back home are being gambled, he's shocked. When he tells Susan and Barbara, though, they say it's a good thing, as now the Khan will have his gift and Marco can go home and they can have their TARDIS back. Their smiles fade, however, when they learn that Ping Cho's fiancé is at the palace and that the wedding will be happening tomorrow. The courier comes in to tell Marco that due to the argument over who stole the TARDIS, Ian and Ping Cho are under arrest. Susan said they don't have to worry, however, as the Doctor is going to win the TARDIS back. So then the Doctor loses.
He gave me this, the consolation prize, a piece of his paper currency.
Oh, Grandfather!
Later, Ian tells Marco what happened and how Tagana is plotting against the Khan. Because Tagana is a VIP guest of the Khan, Ian is going to have to stand trial. Ping Cho, however, is excused because of her wedding. That evening, just before the banquet, the Khan is presented with a TARDIS and he admires it. Tagana comes over and the Khan thanks her for recovering it. He then starts planting seeds of doubt of Marco in the Khan's head. Kublai Khan questions why Marco didn't punish the gang for trying to steal the ship.
The caravan belonged to them, my lord. It was wrong of me to do so.
It seems Marco has finally realised that taking someone else's property to give as a gift is not a very nice thing to do, and he is promptly punished as the Khan refuses his request to go back home to Venice. Now, with Tagana in the Khan's favour and his hopes of going home shut down, Marco Polo leaves the Great Hall, defeated. After the banquet, everyone seems upset. It turns out that Ping Cho's fiancé has drunken a cup filled with poison and died. As you can imagine, the wedding isn't going forward, and Ping Cho is free. The Khan asks for Tagana to be brought in front of him, and Marco goes to get him, but not without some words.
I underestimated you, Tagana.
No. You overestimated yourself.
The gang are trying to figure out what Tagana is planning to do when they hear that Lo Gai's army are marching towards Peking. They figure out that Tagana is planning to assassinate the Khan. They all go to warn the Khan, but are stopped by Marco, who thinks they're trying to escape. When they tell him that what's going on, however, he rushes to the banquet hall, where Tagana makes his move. Then the epic battle begins. Marco eventually gets the upper hand, and the guards rush in to restrain Tagana. The Khan sentences him to death, so he obliges. As the guards drag away the body, Marco slips the Doctor the key to the TARDIS, and they sneak away in the confusion. Ping Cho and Susan say goodbye, and they get the hell out of there. The Khan doesn't seem all that bothered by it, and Marco gives some final thoughts.
But what is the truth? I wonder where they are now. The past or the future?
Let's take an overview of the story. This serial presents us with a real adventure, as we go on a long journey that takes us weeks, going from place to place. It has this really episodic feel to it, like the Lord of the Rings or something, with our characters travelling to a location across this vast and dangerous landscape. And speak of landscape, I feel China is a great location for this type of story. It's such a rich culture, and it's also just really fucking big. I find Tagana a really clever villain at manipulating characters, mainly Marco. It's like every time one of his plans falls through, it's okay because he's got like 3 more ready to go. I just really like a smart, competent villain. If I was going to say something bad about the story, it'd probably be the pacing. Well, yes, it does take a more episodic nature, and this does help it fluff things out a bit. 7 episodes is still just too long, even for any story. So overall, I give Marco Polo a 7 out of 10. Diving deeper in, let's talk about characters. Let's start with the titular Marco Polo. What I find interesting is that Marco, for the majority of the story, is an antagonist. He is the prime obstacle for our heroes, and while Tagana is the main villain, he can't outright attack them because they're both in Marco's control. He is the one with all the power. That's why both parties spend the story trying to convince Marco that they're the ones he should trust. Despite all that, Marco never comes off as a bad person, just a desperate one. He comes off as a reasonable guy who's doing a very unreasonable thing because he just wants to go home. I think it works to have him as a central character. He fills many roles: antagonist, ally, obstacle, and sympathetic over the course of this story. Moving away from Marco, we see Tagana, who, as I said before, is a great villain. He's really quick on his feet. When one plan falls through, he's like, okay, let's try something new. He's so sneaky, deceptive, and clever. He's a master manipulator. Moving to our main cast, we have Barbara, who sadly doesn't really have much to do here, except to be kidnapped. Ian, on the other hand, gets lots to do. Maybe a little too much. The show might as well be called Ian Who at this point. For Susan, we get to see her develop a real friendship with Ping Cho, which is lovely to see. But more interesting is the moments where she talks about her home and her longing for adventure. I won't say why this is interesting just yet, just keep it in the back of your head, okay? The Doctor's really fucking angry in this, which makes sense since he did have his most prized possession robbed. But what I see here is that the Doctor is a very prideful person, and having his property taken from him by a man that is light years below him and not being able to do anything about it is probably very frustrating. If I was to say what the overarching theme of Marco Polo, it'd probably be home. The longing for one's home. We see it mainly from Marco, as his want to go back to Venice is the catalyst for the story, but it also reflects in Ian and Barbara's arc of trying to get back to their own time and place. Susan and the Doctor view the TARDIS as their home, and they desperately try to get that back. Ping Cho runs away to go back to her home to escape her marriage. It's a goal that, in some shape or form, all the characters share, and so that concludes this installment of Doctor Who Digest. Join me next time as the Doctor and his co travel to another alien world and must go on what may be their greatest adventure yet in The Keys of Marinus. So, I've been the Hooligan, and you've been wonderful. I'll see you later.